policy or not.
It's just warm the seat.
I'm not sure.
It's pretty annoying. Because
We just have to be. I don't have my iPad because there's some issues that they're trying to sort out, so I'll be putting off the screen. Welcome, councillors and staff, to our workshop and briefing for July. Any declarations before we kick off, Councillor Milne?
1.2 declare.
1.2. As I think most will be aware, our CEO Robert Jennings has been caught up with some flight cancellations, so he's unable to attend this morning. He'll be getting back here as soon as he possibly can. That seems to be the world of air travel at the moment. So will you be staying in, Councillor Milne, or leaving the room? What's your intention with?
I will be requesting to stay.
Okay. Any other declarations, councillors? Great. Item 1.1, the Chief Executive Officer Annual Delegation Review. I'll hand over to Ms Hatch.
Good morning, Mr Mayor and councillors. The Council to CEO Delegation Review occurs annually, or cannot occur more often than that if we need to. The delegations are part of the effective council functions of how we operate. I'll take the report as being read. There was also an attachment to give a little bit more explanation about how delegations work. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Are there any questions? Because what I'm going to do is, there are thousands of these delegations, and what we do is we go off. King and Company solicitors provide an update twice a year, and then we have staff go through them. It takes a long time, but we make sure that anything that we have functions for are included in the delegations list. We have talked previously about council delegations to the Mayor. We will be coming back with a separate report on that one. But for now, this is just Council to CEO delegations.
Any questions, councillors?
There's thousands of them, and we could go, if anyone has got any questions, they can come and see the governance team.
No questions, councillors? Councillor Stewart.
Mr Mayor, it just seems most of the adds and amendeds and deletes are to do with changes in legislation rather than really changing delegations.
That's right. There is a few pieces of new legislation, including the Electricity Act. And the Electricity Act's been around for a while, but I think it's to do with workplace health and safety and just ensuring that there's a few other delegations under that piece of legislation.
No other questions, councillors? Right, thank you, Ms Hatch. Item 1.2, declaration from Councillor Milne.
Advisor room, last time it was considered to council, I did declare a declarable conflict of interest due to being the author of the letter and on the management committee of the organisation has made the application. However, I believe I can consider this matter in the public's best interest and advise during a session we had the department. I also may retain valuable information that I might be able to add to this item, so I will request to stay in the room, please.
Is there any questions for Councillor Milne from the councillors? We have, is there someone to move that Councillor Milne stay in the room? Councillor Polly. Councillor Stewart the second. All those in favour? Councillor Stewart, Councillor Polly, Councillor Fredman and myself. Against? Councillor Warlock, Councillor Smurden, Councillor Jensen, Councillor Devereux. We have a deadlock, and that means it comes to me.
It's Thomas' turn.
I'll use my casting vote to vote in favour, and Councillor Milne can stay. Thank you. I'll hand over to you, Mr Burns, and you can start.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a reasonably simple question, but quite a complex consultation result. I will take the report as read, but Ms Stark is here to provide some salient points and answer questions alongside me.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Still catching my breath. Running a little bit late this morning and hence running upstairs. As outlined in the report, Council is a trustee for a site at 110 Empress Street in Tin Can Bay. As outlined in the executive summary, the building or community hall has never formally been named by council. The hall has been known locally in various ways, mainly linked to the names of former tenants of the site. The current tenant, which is the Cooloola Coast Youth Activity Project Inc., has requested council to name the hall, and they put the suggestion of Empress Street Community Hall forward. Community consultation has been undertaken. Based on the results of the online survey, 2 names were popular. This report outlines the history of the facility, the naming proposal, and the analysis that's been undertaken against the relevant council policies. Under the naming of council facilities policy, officers are required to provide you with a recommendation of that name for council deliberation and endorsement, with councillors resolving to either adopt, alter or reject the proposed name. As outlined in the report, as Mr Burns outlined, the survey results were close. Of those surveyed, there were differing opinions. However, as outlined in the report, the proposed naming of the hall came down essentially to 45% of the survey respondents supported Empress Street Community Hall as the name, whereas 43% supported Scout Hall variation. We've outlined a couple of the council policies that are relevant, that is the community facilities policy and also the community leasing policy. Based on that analysis, we took councillors through the Scout Hall option as well as the Empress Street option, and really, Mr Mayor, it's over to yourselves and the councillors to share your views about how you'd like to go forward with this naming proposal. Thank you.
And councillors, we need to be aware that we're not here to determine the name today. It's really to get some information if you have any questions, and then a recommendation can be put together by staff for meeting in a future date. Are there any questions? I think Councillor Jensen, then President Deborah.
I think we need to consider the history of the hall, being that it was the Lions, Don Reid and the Scouts that built it right at the beginning. And, you know, somebody that's moved into the area and hasn't even lived there for 10 years wants to change that name now. The locals have called it Scout Hall forever. Even when it was Tunkenbah Hall, they called it the Scout Hall. So I just think we need to take into consideration the history of our buildings.
Councillor Fred.
I appreciate the history. I had to put a wall back up on that hall on the left-hand side. It fell off. It was falling off. And as a great believer in heritage, on one hand, but also aware of the reality of the situation, would it be possible, and hopefully it should be part of our policy, to have a plaque or something there telling the history? Because it was a community effort that built it. It was for a community group. It was much loved for its original purpose of course, it wasn't Scouts, it was Sea Scouts, if I recall correctly. So whatever we decide on as a name, and I've got no particular leaning either way there, if it's not the Scout Hall, could we have some sort of recognition?
Through you, Mr Mayor, because this is a council asset, council can both put up plaques, name rooms inside, or put up any other adornment that they wish to that isn't relative to a formal gazetted name. So that would be entirely council's choice, so we could do that, and we could do that from our existing operational budgets, and we could either be part of a resolution or it could just be an operational request from councillors.
Good. We'll just go with Councillor Deverell and then Councillor Mills.
Thank you. Just through the Mayor, I was disappointed with the wording of the survey. When we're going out to ask the public ideas for naming a hall, it just seemed like it was skewed heavily in favour of being called Emperor Street Community Hall. Do do you support naming of the unnamed hall located at 110 Emperor Street, Tincan Bay, Emperor Street Community Hall? So I don't understand why it wasn't, what would you like to name the hall? These are the options, tick your favourite.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I believe, and I'm just checking, there were three questions. One was, do you support naming of the unnamed hall, Emperor Street Hall?
Yep.
If no, is there another name? And why do you support this name? The reason that we targeted the Emperor Street name is fairly simple, and that was the request that we received about naming the hall. So that was the question we were asked to determine in terms of the community. If we had gone out with a very open door consultation, like Councillor Devereux is suggesting, we may have ended up with 50 names or 2 names or 1 name, and it would have made the assessment significantly different. That's the simplest reason and simplest answer. That's the simplest answer. We talked about this yesterday in preparation for this meeting. It was the same process we used as the very successful consultation that we just concluded at the William Dakin Bridge. So we felt that that had worked really well, so we repeated that. And, you know, that would be our position moving forward if someone asks us to name something in a specific way. If that doesn't suit councillors, then we can obviously take that on board and change our process.
Councillor Milne.
Just in response to some of the items that have been brought up, as indicated by the letter that was attached, it was when we took over the management agreement, it was identified that we didn't have an identity for the hall, went through a process and came up with a suggested name and forwarded to council at council's suggestion on how to move forward on having a management or manageable facility for the community. In respect to what Councillor Fredman was saying, I've been part of hall forums for many, many years with my involvement with other facilities, and during one of those hall forums it was brought up as one of the topics of having halls celebrated in history and actually having that history acknowledged. So that has been taken through to having this management, and an application has been made to council for an internal, I don't know if you guys have received that, for an internal recognition for Scouts, and also another signage outside for having that history recognised. It was always the intention to do so. We didn't put forward Scouts because it was a recognised name to another group that's no longer there. It's like another facility that's in the Coolor Coast. The complex, it was the Sport and Recreation Complex. It is now turned to the Community Complex, it's locally known, but it was originally Sport and Recreation. So it's evolved through time. We just wanted to make it a community space that was neutral, but still recognise history. And I don't want to bring up, because I don't know how it's been processed in council yet from what we've proposed, but there is a proposal for a very heavy recognition to Scouts with the hall.
Through you, Mr Mayor, neither Ms Stark or I have seen that documentation yet. We will now have a quick look and see where it went. It is probably with our properties team, so we can catch that up and come back with regards to that.
Councillor Stewart.
In terms of the name being Scout Hall, I do note the report says that it could give you confusion. They built a hall somewhere else. But the District Commissioner of Scouts actually asked me about the hall, and I said, well, it's already being used. I'm sure if you negotiated, you could share use of it. There's no sense that they wanted to name Scout Hall or anything like that. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to some people organising a event down at Tincan Bay, and I said, no, the Emperor Street Hall, because that's just where it is. And to them, it was the Buffalo Hall. Yeah. And the name that's what probably more known as the Buffalo Hall than anything else, as far as I know. So, I mean, you go with any name, and yet it doesn't get one mention. So it just shows how skewed sometimes our surveys are, because no one raised the possibility of Buffalo Hall, even though that's what it's known as. So,
Councillor Smith.
The survey was done online, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Because I've also heard that there's been a lot of people in Tincan that wanted to vote, couldn't get on to vote online, and they would have voted for the Scout Hall.
Through
Through you, Mr Mayor, we're not aware of anyone who's contacted council to suggest that they couldn't get online. There were some delays in the first couple of days, I believe, that Councillor Jensen talked to me about, and we fixed it. It was just probably a day's delay at the start of the process. It didn't really affect the material result. There weren't any community meetings for this one. There was one, sorry, yeah, there was one. But yeah, we're not aware of any feedback that people missed out. Of course, this is a workshop item. If councillors wishes to redo the consultation, we of course could do that. We think you've got a reasonable result. There is other considerations which I can cover later as well, once councillors have finished speaking.
Councillor Wardle.
Thank you. Through the chair, the old Scout Hall down Tincamp Bay, as we know it, probably wouldn't exist today if council had its own way about 15, 20 odd years ago when they wanted to demolish it, until a builder came along to tender and quote it and worked out that it was a fraction of the price to fix it. So it still exists. So now we want to rename it, and it states here that Gympie Regional Council recognises the value of naming the region, but most ratepayers see value as value for money, because it comes out of their pocket is value for money. What is it costing the ratepayer to have this place renamed? I was just wondering what this whole process with time, resources of council staff, putting out community consultations, time, money.
Is it being renamed or just being
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd probably have to take that on notice, but there are 2 points that are relevant to that. One, it is important to recognise that it isn't a renaming of the hall. There are community names, but council has never formally named this hall. It is 30 years old, and it was, as Councillor Fredman referred to, that it put up a wall, fix a wall a number of years ago. But in terms of officer time, because that's really the only expense, putting it up on the website doesn't really cost us too much, and we didn't do a lot of media collateral, so we didn't have to print and stuff. But it's just officer time. But I could guesstimate, but it's a chunk of officer time, both to prepare the report, prepare the survey, evaluate the survey, manage the survey on the web, and also attend the community meeting that occurred. It would, yeah, I'd have to take it on notice, but we could work it out. But it's a chunk of time.
Councillor Wardle.
When a community group comes to council and says, the council says we need community consultation, why is it at the expense of the ratepayer when it's a community group that highlights the, shouldn't it go back on to the community group? Or even if we find out what the expense is, shouldn't that expense go back to the community group and they can pay for what they initiated in the first place?
Through you, Mr Mayor, if I may, I'll let Ms Stark answer this, because I think she's going to refer to the policy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So in terms of your question, councillor, under the naming policy, any individual or organisation can come forward with a naming request. So it could be a councillor, it could be a community group, it could be an individual resident. The onus under the policy is then on council as the administrative body to undertake that community engagement. There has been a chunk of time spent on this, but I would suggest it wasn't an extensive engagement process. There was an online survey and one drop-in session. The time involved with this particular matter has been in preparing the report because of the history of this hall, which hasn't been named in the past. There would be further expense to council if we were to go and re-engage again.
I think also it's council itself that said we need to get a community consultation. Staff brought a report, which is probably, anyway, staff brought a report and then we said go to community consultation, so it wasn't the what's under community
That's
group.
true.
Pick one.
Councillor Jensen, then Councillor Credman, then Councillor Collins.
And as far as surveys go, I had Brett Green from the Scouts call, and there were a lot of them that wanted to vote online but didn't have an email. So I told them to just you had to put an email address in. They had phone numbers.
I'll take that on because
We might have to set that out of notice, Mr Mayor. We don't believe that that's the case, but we'll check that.
They tried that, and so your results would have been markedly different had they had that chance to vote. And also, people were telling Councillor Waldock that they couldn't vote either. So the older generation find it hard to do these surveys online because they don't have emails. And also, as far as surveys go, 115 were received. 52 said that they supported it and 62 said no. So the nays have it. Is that right?
through the chair, the results were very tight, councillor. And when we did further analysis of it, it was actually even more different because, as outlined on page 4 of the report, 52 had marked yes to the question that they support the renaming of it, with 62 marking no, that they did not support that. However, when we went through the results, one submitter who'd actually ticked yes had intended to tick no, and I did call that particular submitter because they had a phone number, so I could check that with them. So therefore, the revised ratio was actually 51 yes to the proposed name and 63 not. So on one hand, you've got 51 supporting it with a yes, 63 saying no. But then when you dig down to the next question of if not, why, what other name do you suggest? 51 respondents supported Empress Street Community Hall and 49 supported Scout Hall. So again, very close.
But the nays have it. So you go to the nays, and then the Scout Hall has it. So, and with one vote in between, I would be very cautious as to what I propose.
I think the other point Councillor Jensen has highlighted is, and if they did, just because they didn't put in another name, doesn't mean they support the name that was suggested.
Yeah.
And so it does, it does create some challenges there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the other option that staff have put forward through here is that our job as officers is to look at the consultation results, but our job is also under the policy to review the naming proposals against the policy criteria and the policy intent. So that's what we've done in the report in terms of the naming options analysis, and we've outlined that both the Scout Hall and the Empress Street Community Hall do meet the criteria under the policy. It's really then a matter of understanding the weight of which one we think is stronger against the policy.
It might just be easiest, because I think there's, probably some equal division in the room, just to come back with 2 recommendations for the meeting, one for each name, and we'll see how the cards fall.
Through you, Mr Mayor, officers did consider this, and we are more than happy to bring those 2 recommendations in that manner, and that's something that we've discussed. The other consideration that I think we want to float at the workshop is that there are 2 other alternative options that council could take. One is that they choose not to name the hall at all, and the local residents call, because we don't have to, there's nothing that says we have to. The local residents could call it whatever they wish to. If they wish to call it the Buffalo Hall, they can call it the Buffalo Hall. If they want to call it the Scout Hall, they call it the Scout Hall. The other option that we have, and we could put that in the report if councillors feel that that is appropriate to make that as an option. The other option that we would consider putting in the reports, as well as the 2 names, is to allow the tenants who currently lease the facility to name the hall. The halls, there's a lot of talk about heritage. It's been there since 1999, so it's been there since for 33 years. And over that 33 years, there's been a number of tenants. Each tenant appears to have named the hall themselves, and we could continue that philosophy and allow the leasing tenants who are incumbent in the hall to name it as they feel fit and make that available to them. Now, council may not want to do that, but but that is an option, and as officers we feel that we need to raise that for councillors to consider.
Well, I feel from the conversations we've had so far, we're probably not going to get something of consensus that staff can walk away and go, well, that's where council wants to go. So maybe a multi-pronged approach, just to give, when it comes to the meeting, give council the option to determine whichever one they want to go with. I think it's too divided at this point in time. It was Councillor Fredman next, then Polly, then Neil.
We haven't canvassed all the names yet, and when I remember back when the Western Wall was falling off, it could be named after the contractor who repaired the hall. You could call it Waldock Hall.
Don't insult them.
I'll put that down as the fifth recommendation.
Councillor Polly.
I'm not sure if I have a question now. My question was, as Councillor Devereux, you basically answered that too. And so I was thinking through, I mean, I only just passed statistics in grade 10s, but I'm thinking 50 respondents out of what, 2,000 people down there is a pretty skew. Well, would that be even rate on a statistics scale? When the Warren Dakin Bridge, how many people of the residents actually
Had 500 signed.
Yeah, but the community wanted.
Yeah, but that's in terms of percentage of, here's the community of a couple of thousand people in Kalula Cove and Tincan, 50 people are making a decision, and when 40 something are making another decision, it's a bit tight, I thought, whereas that was clear. Warren Dakin Bridge was clear, so.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a really interesting discussion point that Councillor Polly raises. But ordinarily, if we get somewhere between 1% and 6%, we think that's a pretty good result. And in this instance, it's probably around the 5% mark of the current population of Tincan Bay. Now, there may have been people from the Gympie region or from Curra or from Imbil who may have voted in this, so that affects it. In terms of the naming of a hall, we thought it was a reasonable response, not brilliant, but definitely not a poor response.
Okay.
Councillor Milne.
Interesting in the survey, if you do look at it, it was when you look at the results for the Empress Street Hall versus the Scouts Hall, the Empress Street Hall was mainly locals. I think there was only 6 that wasn't. Where you're looking at 50% for the Scouts were not from the Kalula Coast. So there obviously was a historic and passionate connection to that, but they are not currently on the coast. The local population agreed with it because it gave an easy identification of where the name of the hall would be, the location of the hall. That's why we proposed that name. And so it was easy to find because everyone goes, oh, I'm having an event or it's down at the Scouts Hall, where's that? So they go, well, it has, it's down Empress Street. So it was easy just to call it Empress Street Hall for a locality. When you look at all halls in the Gympie region, they are locality based. I don't think there's any, there's some are attached to another group. We had an option as an organisation to just apply for a signage, and I'm looking at this now and I'm like, well, maybe we should rescind that request to name the hall and just put a sign on it, just like everybody else. We didn't want to call it the Youth Activity Project Hall because that gives ownership to a group. It wanted to be a community space forevermore. So it was more about just having an identifiable sign on the building. It was never about owning the building or giving ownership or trying to take that identity away from it. It was about the management agreement that we got, and the difficulties identified straight away is how do I make email addresses, booking forms, all of those things to go with the hall. And I will say now they have been made out to Empress Street because I had no option. I couldn't leave it blank. And then obviously this came up a year ago, caused controversy at the time for a different reason. Now it's another reason. So I do question sometimes whether it's just the controversy of maybe me, or my group. And I do question whether, it was signposted at Buffalo Hall for 11 years, I believe, and no one brought up that wasn't called the Scout Hall then. So, maybe it's a consideration. I go talk to officers on behalf of the group that I represent, maybe, and then it's just about signposting. It doesn't have to be named. It was just an easy, identify, manageable. Remember, there is a group managing this facility. Just to have it identified. That was the whole intent. It wasn't about ownership at all. So that's one of the concerns I have with, and there is currently another. I've been involved. This is my second time round. I've been involved with trying to get Scouts going again. Tin Can Bay, so there is a possibility that there could be a group down there.
Councillor Jensen.
Just nitpicking. The yellow one here, number 42. It's not in the Scout Hall section, but it says
No.
example Scout. So it could have been that one.
Through you, Mr Mayor, so.
Who cares?
I do.
I get in terms of the second question, it was if you stated no, is there another name you suggest? And the one name that they put in that box was Tin Can Bay Community Hall. So our analysis was that that's the primary hall name that they would have suggested. And then the second answer was a generic community name rather than a street name. The other halls in Tin Can Bay also named community, then perhaps go with a more specific name, example Scout or a significant local's name. However, the name that they put down as their primary suggestion was the Tin Can Bay Community Hall. So that's the one in the raw data that they suggested. But yes, they did name Scout or another significant local's name, which they haven't.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think you summarised it fairly well earlier on. I don't think we'll get a resolution today, and I think officers bringing this to a workshop was to identify if there was a clear direction from councillors. I think it's clear that there isn't a clear direction from councillors. We can't secure a resolution today. So I think the point you made about officers bringing a report with options is probably the way to go from now. I would just ask if, and take the liberty of saying, we would probably recommend one name as a recommendation. If councillors didn't want to support that, we would vote no. Then we'd recommend the second name, and then the third name, and then the fourth name, which would be do nothing. We can talk with the CEO about the best way of doing that, and that may not be the best way. There may be a better way, but it would be something along the lines of bringing a variation of those four options to council in the report, if that was acceptable.
Yeah, I think an option, on either name, and then the do nothing or the community group.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the two names and then the community group and do nothing would probably be give councillors enough choice.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, just through you. So the recommendations would be Empress Street Community Hall, a Scout Hall or a name, not name it at all, so reject it completely, or as is the previous practice, that the tenant can sign the property as they wish for the duration of their tenancy, or it gets named Empress Street with a plaque inside detailing the history of it all.
No, we don't need.
We don't need that one. We can just do that one.
Park
The
regardless.
detail that goes inside, I think, will go.
I can't.
Yeah, we can just.
With Councillor Mills first and Councillor.
I would just like to a process question. If the community group that has proposed the name or request to name actually considered that request, what would happen?
We would actually report that, and then we would. I might have to take that on notice, Mr Mayor, but I would suggest that an officer's recommendation would be that we would go to the second option, unless the group said we don't want it named at all, in which case we would probably still put the four names up as the report.
Well, we have a recommendation from council to report back and to close off that resolution.
That's correct.
We need another resolution, so.
That's correct.
If that was the community group's decision to do that, then it would be reported back to us and we'd still make a decision as we saw fit. I believe actually Councillor Devro and then was before Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, yep, good.
Just first of all, I've got a few points here. The information here talks a lot about the geo benefits of having Emperor Street Hall versus Scout Hall. I don't necessarily. I do understand the point, but I think it was more valid 10 years ago than it is these days when we've got mobile phones that you just put it into. I don't think SES would rely on the fact that Emperor Street Hall is in Emperor Street as opposed to actually knowing where the thing is. So to me that was, it's a point, but it's not the major thing that it's made out. I do wonder, given the fact that we've got people that wanted to vote that said they couldn't, and regardless of whether council organisation itself knows, councillors were told, were asked. So it is a point. And the other thing is that if they couldn't find it on, you know, if they not online or whatever, then they're less likely to go and contact council via the same methods. So, given also the fact that the questions were skewed towards Emperor Street, and yeah, it's a close result, but I think that's why, because it's quite easy to just tick a yes. I just wonder if it might be worth another survey with those two names, asking people, directly pitting one against the other, but also having it so that people could manually go to the library at Tin Can Bay to vote, so that there's somewhere physical they could go in and fill something out. Because, you know, the survey, I'm not sure what the latest census results were, but the one before that was 20% of the population in our region don't have the means to go online even. So, and let's face it, down there it is a retirement area. So,
Councillor Stewart.
No, don't want to. Because I'm tending to think.
good start.
It's amazing. I'm trying to get my thoughts together properly now. We should be about empowering our local groups and whatever. And on that basis, I'm happy for the local group to name it, whatever they want to name it. And even if we make an official council name, if I was running a group and the hall was officially called Scout Hall, I think that's confusing. I will just name it whatever I want to name it, because that's just easier. And I just say, well, it's an Emperor Street. That's what, as a group, I want it called. Or if they want to call it Youth Activity Program or whatever, let's give that power to that group to name it while they have the lease. And to me, that actually should be the number one option, but obviously you can go through a different process. But I don't know, in some ways I don't even know why council ever got involved in it, and it was a mistake of the group to ever propose, and then they should have just put up a sign like other groups have done in the past.
Oh, yes.
I think we're sort of going around each
But we are going around each other, and it's probably a bit irrelevant, but I just sort of...
We're sort of having conversations today that relate to the meeting.
Can I just put one more point in? It was the history that, it was the Lions that proposed to build the building, and they approached Greg Reid to go to Don Reid. I did talk to Lions that were involved back in the day. Can I just explain?
On the chair,
Okay.
on the chair, we are going round and round in circles here. There is a lot of information. That sort of information is more pertinent for the meeting, when we can actually sit down and, as a council, decide which direction we want to go. We have a number of other agenda items, and everyone has a different opinion on it. We're not going to convince anyone, and it doesn't matter how much we throw up today in terms of information, it won't change a lot of people's minds. I think if staff go away with and come back for the meeting with a recommendation that includes the 4 options, it covers everything that everyone has talked about today as an option for council to proceed with, and allows us to keep moving. We could have this conversation for 2 hours and still not agree, and I think it's just time we moved on, so that we can continue with the next items and not get bogged down.
Thank you,
Mr. Burns. Thank you, Mr. Item 2.1.
Are we off?
Your point about
Yeah, sorry about that.
the
We'll just get the live stream off.
there were